My family came to America fleeing persecution in Europe. For my mom's parents, it was the pogroms of Russia, in which thousands of Jews died. For my dad, it was Hitler, the creation of ghettos, and the final solution that killed millions. As children, my brothers and I were taught that we were the lucky ones who made it out. But with that luck came a responsibility. Never again didn't just mean that people like us shouldn't suffer. It meant others shouldn't suffer either.
You want to join me here? Won't you be seated, please, ladies and gentlemen? Come on, Dr. Jaffe. Mr. Krogh, Mr. Early. Fine, fine. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to summarize for you the meeting that I have just had with bipartisan leaders. America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Gold teeth, maybe in his 30s, and he wears like a turban on his head. Louis in the crew.
That's why I believe the tide of battle has turned, and we're beginning to win the crusade for a drug-free America.
Okay, deal is good. Moving, guy. Move in.
My name is Nanny Jetter.
Nanny Jetter was like a second mother to me. Though she started out working for my family, she was never a nanny. Nanny is actually her name. Our families were close, and her children and grandchildren were my playmates growing up. But as we got older, I saw many of them struggling with poverty, joblessness, crime, and worse.
Senator Obama has an advantage, but it's still very, very early in this night.
When I asked Nanny what she thought might have gone wrong, her answer was surprisingly simple.
I think drugs. Drugs is a monster. The killing, the stealing, the people being destroyed. My son James, he died in 89 or 87, I can't quite remember. Before he died, he said, "Mommy, I'm just tired of it. I cannot live this life. It doesn't matter what I do, I just want to die." All I know, my son used a needle.
To understand what drugs had done to Nanny Jetter's family and others like it, I wanted to get out on the road to talk to people.
It's absolutely true that drugs have destroyed lives, that heroin and cocaine, for example, do nothing to engender individual dignity. But while covering the drug war as a journalist for more than a decade, I came to understand that what drugs haven't destroyed, the war against them has.
The war against drugs is heating up.
Somebody down the road said, we're going to fight a war against illicit drugs because drugs are bad. Okay, there's no argument there. But think about where we are 30 years later.
By a show of hands, how many people here had any kind of drug involvement and why they're in here?
I'm in there for selling drugs. I have a life and 30-year sentence.
I killed a guy back in 1984.
How'd that happen?
I just dope and out of my head, and I wound up shooting a guy in the mouth and killed him.
We are the jailingest country on the planet.
Put them away. Put them away where they belong.
Beyond Saudi Arabia, China, or Russia, Nobody jails their population at the rate that we do. And yet, drugs are purer than ever before. They're more available. There are younger and younger kids willing to sell them. It'd be one thing if it was draconian and it worked. But it's draconian and it doesn't work, and it just leads to more.
We in the United States, perhaps our dirty little secret is that between 10 and 16 billion dollars are spent by Americans to pay for these illegal drugs, creating a demand.
The thing with the war on drugs is it tries to deal with a health problem as if it was a legal problem. Addiction is an effect of human unhappiness and human suffering. When people are distressed, they want to soothe their distress. When people are in pain, they want to soothe their pain. So the real question is not why the addiction, but why the pain.
One of the realities is most people getting arrested in this country for drugs are selling drugs to support their own habit. And if you stand in a federal court, you're watching poor, uneducated people be fed into a machine like meat to make sausage. It's just bang, bang, bang. Next.
Police station for what? I didn't go nowhere.
What we deal with here is a lot of lower level narcotic activity.
No, well, we do the drugs. We do mostly drugs and prostitution. Oh, the drugs are never going to be gone. Forget that. To say you're going to be drug-free completely.
In drug work, you never really got that satisfaction, I suppose. Because you don't get rid of drugs. I mean, along the way, you have small victories here and there. But if you look at the big picture, how are we getting anywhere? And you could certainly be frustrated.
I'm 28 years old, being sentenced for 50 grams crack cocaine.
I am Mark Bennett, United States District Court Judge for the Northern District of Iowa. And in my 15 years, I've sent over 2,600 people to federal prison.
Coming in here today, Maurice Haltewinger's best chance is a sentence of 20 years.
Drug laws, it turns out, often carry what are called mandatory minimum sentences, below which a judge cannot sentence a defendant, no matter what the circumstances. While following the steps that so many Americans take through the world of the drug war, I couldn't help but notice that at every stage, Black Americans were disproportionately represented.
In any war, you've got to have an enemy. And when you think about the impact, particularly on poor people of color, there are more African Americans under correctional control today in prison or jail, on probation or parole, than were enslaved in 1850, a decade before the Civil War began. And that's something we haven't been willing to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what's really going on?
There's no question that the criminal laws impact disproportionately on poor and minorities.
Certainly disproportionate number of black people are prosecuted.
Yet while people could tell me all about their firsthand experience of this, very few had any idea where it came from.
The drug war began as a war on dangerous narcotics, at least on its face. You can trace modern drug enforcement back to the early 50s, when you started to see the rise of sort of the urban narcotic squads, the narc.
Government agencies charged with the enforcement of narcotics laws have been able until recently to decrease steadily the number of addicts in the United States.
There's no question that there was a passion with which the early narcotics enforcement culture pursued Black America, even though the addict population was always distinctly biracial. At that point, you can't claim that you're trying to isolate a countercultural phenomenon. You're fighting a war against a whole community.
We have 2 million people in our jails and prisons, and 1 million of them are African American. Most of them are males, many of them for nonviolent drug offenses. That is a pattern that has overwhelmed the African American community because we get a whole generation of kids who now have the assumption that they're destined to be in the criminal justice system.
Right now, you've pled guilty to a charge which requires a 5-year mandatory minimum. You know what that means?
It's very interesting. People ask the question, what about personal responsibility?
The only thing you don't do is blame criminals for the crime that they committed. You blame everybody else and everything else.
I wish the answer were that simple, but let's just take a little step back. What you see over and over again in urban America are kids who live in a crowded home, who are hungry when they go to school, who lack attention because they've heard noise and gunshots and other things where they live.
I don't think people fully understand. In the inner city, these kids are making rational choices. I profiled a girl who was like this, a 10-year-old girl. The minute she steps out her front doorway, there are drug dealers out there, no economic opportunity. The school is warehousing her. She doesn't see any prospects. How is she supposed to get out?
The drug dealers are looked at as really the leaders of the community. If your moms can't pay rent, they help out on the rent. If you need a little bit of food, sometimes they will give money to your household for food. It's like back in the days, Magic had the Converse out. Everybody wanted the new Converses, and he would get them for you. The drug dealer would come right up the block from us, 5 or 6 of us. You pick out a pair, you pick out a pair, you pick out a pair. We come back on the block, we all carrying sneaker boxes. He in front of us. Everybody running over to us. Oh, you get the Magics, you get the Magics, you got the Magics. And then we would tell him where we got them from. The next step is every time he comes on the block, you always under him. He wants some water from the store. He give you a $5 bill. Go get me a water. You know the change is yours. Half these waters he didn't drink. Ice cream truck came, always bought us ice cream. And he didn't even have to pay. He'd tell the ice cream man, hey, yo, get him. And ice cream man give us all ice cream. Honestly, I loved them. I loved them because when they came around, it was Christmas. As you get older, they say you get your own money. Sell drugs. Sell drugs. I don't know how to sell no drugs. I say, he's like, you don't have to know how to sell them. Just stand there. I'll send them over to you. He gave me the drugs. I stood there, and he'd point, and they'll come to me. And I had my own sneaker money. I had my own movie money. And then I had my own power.
To go down to a drug corner in the inner city is the rational act of somebody going to work for the only company that exists in a company town. When that is the only economy that's functioning in certain places in this country, what do we expect?
Beyond the structural barriers that promote drug crime on the street, those arrested soon find themselves in a self-perpetuating cycle from which few ever really escape.
People don't realize, for example, that when you arrest a young black man and he goes to jail, the first thing, when he gets out of the prison, he can't get a job in most places because of his record. If he wants to go back to school, to go to college, he's ineligible by law for certain grants. He can't get certain health care benefits. He can't live in certain neighborhoods. His family that was the centerpiece of his life, if they're living in public housing, they can't take him in.
The only people who deserve to live in public housing are those who live responsibly there.
He can't vote.
As a physician, I'm concerned with the casualties of the war on drugs, which is the frontline users and the petty dealers. But rather than seeing the drug problem in isolation, you have to see it in a social context. These are not problems, none of them, that are just intrinsic to individuals. They all represent multi-generational family history, culture, social conditions, and human failure.
You know, like you say, all the things that you knew that when you was coming up, that was wrong. Now, I'm starting to do them, but I can't control it because I got these problems. I'm using drugs, I'm halfway selling drugs, I'm using drugs, and now I got these 2 little boys, pretty boys. And I don't know how to really be their dad. I know I'm supposed to. I know I ain't have one, and I know I'm supposed to. I didn't know how to stop doing what I was doing, excuse me, to be their dad.
America's public enemy #1 in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
The U.S. war on drugs was initiated officially under President Richard Nixon to get his polls up.
I have no sympathy for the pushers and the peddlers and the others in this country. We are going to restore freedom from fear in America again.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy #1 in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
Nixon wins re-election in a landslide victory.
As Nixon's tough talk proved a recipe for electoral success, states across the country began passing tough new laws.
Half the crime is caused by narcotic addicts.
With New York's Rockefeller drug laws setting an example for harsh penalties that would soon be followed by other states.
I am very much a law and order kind of guy. I would rather have 10 police cars than one soup kitchen, if you give me the choice. But sometimes I think that we need to be smarter about what those police officers are actually out there doing. I think a long time ago, we made drugs into this huge thing, and we've made it so illegal, and we've made it such a national issue with that tough on crime stance. You know, nobody can afford to be the first guy to say, wait a minute, we can't afford what we're doing, let's do something different. Because if you even made a noise like you were going to be soft on crime in any way, you would be out of a job.
You will be put away and put away for good. 3 strikes and you are out.
You get in front of a camera and you talk loudly about we need to lock up criminals and we need to make our streets safe, and you get into office and they expect you to do something and you do something, and so we become victims of the soundbite. I think sometimes we have people doing a whole lot of time for not very much crime.
We like to believe that the drug war has given law enforcement all these tools, all of this authority in which to pursue criminality and gangsterism. But actually what it did was it basically destroyed the police deterrent in a very subtle and unintended way.
I guess we're going to have to write this up as a separate case. Totally unrelated to the original drug deal we did, but we stumbled upon a house where a couple of big stacks of money, a good amount of marijuana. That's sometimes how things happen. You know, they're not even planned.
Nobody respects good police work more than me. I spent more than a decade covering it, and there are a lot of detectives who I admire for their professionalism, for their craft. The drug war created an environment in which none of that was rewarded.
Come on over here for a second. Let's get his ID. He's just cutting through the yard.
A drug arrest does not require anything other than getting out of your radio car and jacking people up against the side of a liquor store. Probable cause? Are you kidding? The problem is that cop that made that cheap drug arrest, he's going to get paid. He's going to get the hours of overtime for taking the drugs down to ECU. He's going to get paid for processing the prisoner down at Central Booking. He's going to get paid for sitting back at his desk and writing the paperwork for a couple hours. And he's going to do that 40, 50, 60 times a month so that his base pay might end up being only half of what he's actually paid as a police officer.
Most important thing right here.
We can leave them here, and then we can go back out and do this other deal.
Compare that guy to the one guy doing police work, solving a murder, a rape, a robbery, a burglary. If he gets lucky, he makes 1 arrest for the month. He gets 1 slip signed. And at the end of the month, when they look and they see, Officer A, he made 60 arrests. Officer B made 1 arrest. Who do you think they make the sergeant?
Okay, let's move in, guys, move in.
In a city like, say, Baltimore, where I'm from, our percentage of arrest for murder, for rape, and robbery are half of what they once were. Our drug arrest stats are twice of what they once were.
So what does that do?
It makes a city unlivable. It makes a police department where nobody can solve a fucking crime.
Beyond the incentives that exist for individual officers, it turns out that whole departments have a monetary interest in increased drug arrests.
A couple of months ago, we did a 2-day operation. We arrested over 200 people, a majority of them for selling drugs. A lot of the money comes out of seizures from the drug profits that the bigger players are making off of this. So I guess that money is being put to good use.
So where you get all that money? That money's ours now. That's my money now.
Hey, can we get, somebody get a tow slip for this fine piece of machinery?
Despite their commitment to their work, officers I spoke to across the country expressed growing concern not only about the effectiveness of drug laws, but about their larger impact on the relationship between police and the public.
I mean, we're doing our part out here, and it's frustrating a lot for us because it just seems like because they're addicts, they find themselves committing the same crime that just put them in the jail, say, you know, a week or so prior.
Hold on a second.
All right, whoa.
What's going on? Let me see ID, please.
Watching seasoned drug warriors struggle for answers to what they see as an unwinnable war,
We're actually doing them a favor, tell them, getting them in out of the cold.
I wondered what it was about drugs that made them such a perceived danger in the first place.
U.S. customs officers and police are having another drive to round up dope smugglers. Here's millions of dollars worth of deadly heroin, enough, they say, to kill 6 million people.
Looking to find out more about the longer history of drugs in America, I found an unlikely source in Lincoln historian Richard Miller. His research put drug laws in a fascinating historical context.
Historically, anti-drug laws have always been associated with race. In the 1800s, certain kinds of drugs that are illicit today were common in this country. Cocaine was widely used, heroin. People using drugs was something that was just ordinarily accepted. Opium, for example, was used by middle-aged, successful whites, often housewives in the South. If people were addicted or abusing drugs, they were viewed sympathetically as people who had to be helped. It was seen as a public health issue rather than a crime issue. Well, one of the first changes was on the West Coast, when smoking opium was made a criminal offense. Now, why would opium smoking be illegal in California but not in Mississippi? What was going on in California that was a concern about smoking opium? Well, as it turns out, it had nothing to do with opium itself. The concern was with the people associated with smoking opium, and that was the Chinese, who had come to this country, and many of whom were in California, working hard, working for very little pay, and becoming part of the American success story. But their success was taking jobs away from white workers. So politicians got together and decided they got to find something about the Chinese for which they can be criminalized to get them out of the way. Now, of course, you can't throw people in jail simply because they're Chinese, but you can throw them in jail because they smoke opium. In the same way, we saw things going on with cocaine. Again, it was middle-aged, successful people in this country, business executives, physicians, housewives, all perfectly legal. But then around the turn of the century, cocaine began being associated with blacks. They could withstand police bullets, it was thought. They can work hard all day, all night long, and all day long again, threatening the jobs of white workers. And so laws began to be passed against cocaine. You're not arresting these people officially because they're black. You're arresting them because they've committed some sort of drug violation. Next, of course, we see the change in reputation that hemp has had. Hemp was a legitimate crop from colonial times forward, a widely appreciated commercial product. But then in the 1930s, hemp changed into something vicious and fearsome called marijuana, because at that time, marijuana smoking was being associated with Mexicans, working hard, working cheap. And once again, what was being outlawed was not being Mexican, but just some habit associated with Mexicans. These laws set up a very dangerous precedent of racial control.
The way to think about African American history in the 20th century is as an immigrant story. I mean, the transition from the rural to the urban, it's one of the great mass migrations in the history of the world.
When blacks came out of slavery, they were heavily concentrated in the South in farming-type jobs. As industries were expanding in the North, blacks were recruited to come to work in factories. This gave rise to the great migration of blacks flowing into urban areas.
Sadly, what many of these families came to find is that they had not really escaped Jim Crow at all, but found themselves in a new system of racial control. Racially discriminatory laws across America ensured that poor people of color migrating from the South would be confined to certain parts of the city that we now think of as ghettos.
In 1950, people in these neighborhoods were poor, but they had jobs. By 1960, we're talking about the jobless poor, because industries had moved out of the inner city, leaving behind concentrated populations of poor people, vulnerable to drug trafficking and all of the other problems associated with joblessness.
And what happens when groups are denied access to the core economic engines in a society? They create their own out of prohibited economies. That was true of the Italians and the Irish and the Jews and everybody else who came to the cities a generation before African Americans arrived.
Growing up in Florida, I remember thinking that I never wanted to leave Florida.
I used to tell my friends, like before we go out and do some illegal activity, I used to give them a pep talk and say, you know, God is on our side because he knows that we're poor, and God wouldn't have us be poor, so he understands what we're doing. And, you know, I actually believe that shit.
Carl Hart was part of a generation of black men who experienced firsthand the most dramatic escalation of the drug war in American history. Today, a professor of psychology at New York's Columbia University, his past experience remains a driving force in his work.
In the 1980s, like many people in the black community, I was concerned about the havoc that drugs were wreaking in our community, or the havoc that I thought drugs were wreaking in our community.
And that brings us to the major and sweeping effort that I'm announcing this morning.
In the long history of the drug war, no single chapter would turn out to impact black America more deeply than the 8 years of the Reagan presidency.
What will you do when someone offers you drugs?
We will utilize the FBI, the DEA, the IRS, the ATF, Immigration and Naturalization Service, United States Marshals Services, and the Coast Guard. We intend to do what is necessary to end the drug menace and to eliminate this dark, evil enemy within.
Crack cocaine. Crack, the super addictive and deadly cocaine concentrate.
Crack hit the streets, and suddenly there was just hysteria about this brand new demon-like form of cocaine.
Today, there's a new epidemic, smokable cocaine, otherwise known as crack. It is an uncontrolled fire.
The American people want their government to get tough and to go on the offensive. And that's exactly what we intend, with more ferocity than ever before.
There's your crack. If smaller cities don't have a crack crisis now, they will soon.
What we saw were images of black urbanites on TV smoking crack cocaine over and over and over. And then these incredible stories were associated with crack cocaine, and they were taken as fact.
The drug's so powerful, it will empty the money from your pockets, make you sell the watch off your wrist, the clothes off your back.
Or kill your mother. Yep, that's what we're seeing.
Our society is now infested with drug abusers.
There was a tremendous fear of this epidemic that was going to overcome all of us, not only with drug addiction, but with the violence and terror that was going to come out of this. And tremendous fear led to this view that the criminal laws would save us.
Democrats as well as Republicans got on board to pass a whole new generation of mandatory sentencing laws. These laws raced through Congress in record time. There were virtually no hearings held, no consultation with experts who knew something about drug abuse.
The yeas are 97, the nays are 2.
With overwhelming support, Ronald Reagan signed into law an unprecedented array of mandatory minimum sentences for drug crimes. But no drug would receive harsher penalties than crack.
The penalties were outrageous. That is, the penalty for crack cocaine was made 100 times more punitive than for powder cocaine. Whites were using powder cocaine in boardrooms in suburban America. Blacks were using crack cocaine in public housing and on the street. And what's the response?
Just wipe me out straight off the map for nothing. 57 years for some small rock. You know what I'm saying? I want to know why I'm being treated like I murdered somebody, you know?
In my view, it is not fair to have a 100-to-1 disparity in the difference between powder cocaine and crack cocaine, and let me explain what that means. A crack defendant with 5 grams of crack cocaine is treated the same as a powder cocaine defendant with 100 times more weight, in other words, 500 grams of powder cocaine. And I don't think most people realize this. What is the difference between powder cocaine and crack cocaine? Do you know? The difference is you add baking soda, water, and heat from an oven. That's the only difference.
I run a group called Families Against Mandatory Minimums. I started it in 1991. After my brother was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison, I started meeting other families whose kids were in for so much longer. And I realized my brother was lucky. He only got 5 years.
Crack penalties are ridiculously disproportionate to all other drugs.
In her fight against mandatory minimums, Julie took her cause to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, where she found a powerful and unlikely ally.
I'm Billy Wilkins, and I was the first federal judge in the nation selected by President Ronald Reagan to serve as the first chair of the United States Sentencing Commission.
In 1995, the Sentencing Commission actually voted to make crack and powder cocaine exactly the same.
Now, is crack a dangerous drug? Yes, it is. Is it highly addictive? Yes, it is. But the commission looked at this on many occasions and found that sentencing crack cocaine 100 to 1 was unjust.
There can be no doubt that the higher penalties for crack offenders fall disproportionately on minority defendants.
51% of the crack is used by the white population. In Los Angeles, California, there has not been one white conviction. Not one.
I must just tell you, in my view at least, the findings are very vulnerable.
These people are killing our kids. These people are disrupting society. These people are wrecking our society.
Looking at Maurice's case today, he's facing a double mandatory minimum from 10 years to 20 years. Does he deserve a 20-year sentence? I don't think so. I'm the first United States District Court judge to do a 1-to-1 sentencing ratio between crack and powder cocaine.
Judge Benny gave me a 1-to-1 ratio instead of 100 to 1. So he took my guideline from like 30 years to like, I think I was under 10 years or right at 10 years, but it didn't help.
In Maurice's case today, the justice was trumped by the mandatory minimum.
Judge Bennett's decision to use a 1-to-1 ratio turns out to have been largely symbolic, since Congress's complex system of mandatory minimums has the final say.
The minimum on a conspiracy is 10 years, and then with me having a prior drug felony, the minimum is 20 years. So I got a 20-year sentence today.
The system worked. The system worked the way Congress planned for it to work. They're not going to come home and campaign on the fact that I'm for more lenient sentences for drug dealers.
Taking on the drug cartel and winning the drug war.
Just the opposite. I'm going to come home and campaign. I want tough sentences for drug dealers.
I just think we need tougher sentencing in
But
Virginia.
whether Congress started out with race in mind or not, it turns out, in fact and in practice, that minorities are targeted by these mandatory minimums, the 100-to-1 ratio, more than others are, and that's not good.
And it's very interesting because African Americans do not use crack cocaine any more than whites. In fact, whites use it more. African Americans make up 13% of the population in the US, and they're about 13% of the crack users. In other words, the rest of the users are white and brown, which is kind of amazing because 90% of the crack cocaine defendants in the federal system are African American.
Okay, so about 35 million Americans report using some illicit drug in the past year. But there's this sort of general belief that black people are using drugs disproportionate to their numbers in the population.
After spending so much of his career studying drugs and drug laws in the black community, Carl's focus has turned to a new drug and a new target for law enforcement.
There is a new drug epidemic in the United States, methamphetamines, or meth. Like crack in the 1980s, meth is cheap, potent, and leads addicts to serious crimes.
All across America, we've got people who are trying to lure children into using meth.
By the 1990s, we were seeing a similar phenomenon occur with methamphetamine as we saw with crack cocaine.
They said meth would help me get through my exams.
But the people who are primarily associated with methamphetamine use are poor white folks in trailer parks.
A fully operational methamphetamine lab.
And also gay folks, two sort of despised groups.
How many of you are here on meth sentences then? Wow. Now, how many of you did I personally sentence?
For a long time, crack cocaine was the drug that was populating the prisons. Methamphetamine, though, has rapidly caught up with it and probably overtaken it.
Hey, what's going on, man? If I leave here tomorrow, would you still remember me?
My name is Kevin Ott. My number is 203093. I'm in here for trafficking methamphetamine. I start my 14th year in just a couple of months, and I will be here until I die. Yeah.
I have life without parole for 3 ounces of methamphetamine.
I'm as free as a bird now.
I can't remember it, man. It's been too long. The reason I started with meth is because I got laid off. Somebody said, here, try to sell some of this and get you a little extra money. And then I started using it, and then I had to sell it to pay for it.
How much is 3 ounces of methamphetamine?
It will fit in a small envelope. If you've been busted for 2 prior drug charges, smoking pot, having pot, or methamphetamine, whatever it is, and then you get a trafficking charge, they give you life without parole. It's mandatory. When I first came in, there was only a few of us, 5 or 6 at the most. A couple of years ago, I heard that there were 92 people in the state of Oklahoma that had life without parole for drugs. And it just keeps growing.
Hey, Ott?
Yeah.
You got a visit.
All right. The time I've been locked up, my mother has lost 2 of her brothers, one of her brother's daughters, directly related to drugs. It's been pretty bad for my mom.
You know, a funny thing happened on the way to the 21st century, which is that we shrugged off so much of our manufacturing base, so much of our need for organized labor, for a legitimate union wage, for union benefits, for the types of jobs on which you could raise a family and be a meaningful citizen. We got rid of so much of that, oops, we marginalized a lot of white people.
1 in every 8 Americans has had to visit a food bank over the last year.
And lo and behold, white people, when they're marginalized, when they are denied meaning, when they're denied meaningful work, they become drug addicts too. And they become involved in the methamphetamine trade, and they start turning themselves over to the underground economies that are the only ones there to accept them. Capitalism is fairly colorblind in the end. Our economic engine, when it doesn't need somebody, it doesn't need somebody. It doesn't give a damn who you are. White people found that a little bit later than black folk, but they found it out.
After hearing so much about the failure of the drug war and the enormous harm it does, I wanted to better understand what drives it. Far from the front lines of the war, I discovered a vast and less visible world of people who in their own ways play a part.
This chair, in comparison to other types of restraint chairs, is the most humane. The person in the chair can breathe very easily, and it's not restrictive.
All sorts of people start to get a vested interest, a financial interest, in keeping the system going.
Well, we're in the business of supplying corrections with products. It's a growing market. Prisons, there's a lot of prisoners in the United States. That's what I mean by growing. Now you got me feeling awkward because of the camera. Put it down.
This company, CCA, we are the leader and the largest in the world as far as private prisons and jails. We are profitable. We're highly rated in the stock market. It hones your ability to do it less expensively because we have to earn a profit.
And all these people are not trying to do anything wrong. They're trying to make society better. But their actions combined together become part of the thrust that makes the bad parts of the drug war more feasible and more practical.
The thing with the war on drugs is, and the question we have to ask is, not why is it a failure, but why, given that it seems to be a failure, why is it persisting? And I'm beginning to think, maybe it's a success. What if it's a success by keeping police forces busy? What if it's a success by keeping private jails thriving? What if it's a success keeping a legal establishment justified in its self-generated activity? Maybe it's a success on different terms than the publicly stated ones.
As I've come along in corrections over the last 20 years, I've just kind of watched it grow into this thing. I mean, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. You build a bed, they fill the bed. It starts sucking in money at an astronomical rate, and it just grows and grows and grows of its own accord. You almost can't stop it. You can't afford to stop it. The private prisons, they actually go to a town and say, if you'll use your tax money to buy the land and build the facility, we'll rent it from you, and you'll get rich, and we'll get rich, and we'll all be rich together. Well, that only works if there's prisoners in the bed, so now you're starting to find people that fit the criteria. Now you actually can pay people to go out and look for people that fit the criteria, and now it's going to grow faster.
Yeah, let's say it this way, because it's more honest. Instead of saying, let's get rid of all these drug addicts and drug dealers, and once we throw away the key on them, we'll solve this problem. Why don't you try saying it to yourself this way? All these Americans that we don't need anymore, the factories are closed, we don't need them, you know, the textile mills, they're gone, GM is closing plants. We don't need these people. They're extra Americans, we don't need them. Let's just get rid of the bottom 15% of the country. Let's lock them up. In fact, let's see if we can make money off locking them up in the short term. Even though it's going to be an incredible burden for our society, even though it's going to destroy these families, you know, where these people are probably integral to the lives of other Americans, let's just get rid of them. You know, I mean, at that point, why don't you just say kill the poor? If we kill the poor, we're going to be a lot better off, because that's what the drug war has become.
I was reading the work of Raoul Hilberg, who wrote about the destruction of European Jews in the Holocaust.
We've long known that the process of destruction was an undertaking step by step.
I realized that there was a chain of destruction around the world in more than one society. People do the same things again and again, decade after decade, century after century. Now, this chain of destruction begins with the phase we can call identification, in which a group of people is identified as a cause for problems in society. People start to perceive their fellow citizens as bad, they're evil. They used to be worthwhile people, but now all of a sudden, for some reason, their lives are worthless. The second link in the chain of destruction is ostracism, by which we learn how to hate these people, and how to take their jobs away, how to make it harder for them to survive. People lose their place to live. Often they're forced into ghettos where they're physically isolated, separate from the rest of society. The third link is confiscation. People lose their rights, civil liberties. The laws themselves changed, so it's made easier for people to be stopped on the street, patted down, searched, and for their property to be confiscated. Now, once you start taking people's property away, you can start taking the people themselves away. And the fourth link is concentration. Concentrate them into facilities such as prisons, camps. People lose their rights. They can't vote anymore, have children anymore. Often their labor is exploited in a very systematic form. And the final link in the chain of destruction is annihilation. Now, this might be indirect by, say, withholding medical care, or withholding food, preventing further birth. Or it might be direct, where death is inflicted, where people are deliberately killed. These steps tend to happen of their own momentum, without anybody forcing them to happen. I think a lot of people would be disturbed and outraged by any thought that this process could be going on in America. But it wasn't until I began studying the drug war that I realized that some of these same steps were happening. For instance, identification.
All of us agree that the gravest domestic threat facing our nation today is drugs.
The way to take a problem and make it a huge problem is first you ask the wrong question, and then you feed us the wrong answer.
Who's responsible? Let me tell you straight out. Everyone who uses drugs, everyone who sells drugs, and everyone who looks the other way.
Secondly, ostracism. Society learns to hate drug users.
If you're a casual drug user, you're an accomplice to murder.
Now, all of a sudden, these people who've previously just been identified as drug users become criminals.
If you break the law, you no longer have a home in public housing.
The ultimate effect is isolation, being cut off from mainstream society.
We managed to isolate the poor economically.
You forced them out of the place where they could live and work and possibly be successful, and now you make them criminals.
So once the economics has done its business, then you can have different levels of policing. You can change the rules.
You're under arrest. For what? You got a bench warrant, probably for drugs.
Confiscation. Any property they find on you can be subjected to civil forfeiture. And if we're seizing their property, it's really a simple next step to start seizing their persons. With the drug war, we've gone as far as the concentration phase.
Extraordinary numbers of people are in prison because of drugs
yet it is not a place to get drug treatment. They come out, and then we're surprised that we have the highest recidivism rates, and that results in this cycle of incarceration and overcrowding.
This concentration of people, whether it's in inner city ghettos or in prisons, creates a culture of hopelessness that is incredibly corrosive. When they don't have any prospects, people turn to drugs.
Annihilation. That's not really happening with the drug war in this country. But there are subtle but real ways that don't involve indiscriminate mass killings, violence in prisons.
Severe overcrowding sparked jailhouse riots.
27 inmates died yesterday.
People swept up in drug war violence.
140 drug killings this year.
An Iraqi war veteran was killed after SWAT team officers stormed his Tucson, Arizona home in a drug raid that turned up no drugs.
Drug war is a Holocaust in slow motion. And it's not somebody arguing racial superiority or arguing for the destruction of a given race or religion. That doesn't exist. Let's be honest about what was unique to the Holocaust. But there is an incredible destruction of human life that is class-based, not race-based, but class-based, that is going on and is going on under the guise of a war against illegal narcotics.
All the years I spent in narcotics, I didn't go out there every day and say, let's inflict some harm on the community. I think, an unintended consequence was that, yeah, we probably did. We probably did inflict harm.
America's drug problem, a result of hundreds of years of history, economic policy, social policy, and misunderstanding. So let's not make the most visible manifestation of it, that is to say people being out there in the street and using, the problem. It's not the problem, it's simply a manifestation of a problem. It's simply a symptom. It's sort of like saying that the problem with pneumonia is that you cough. Let's suppress the cough and that's okay. Well, you can suppress the cough. That lung will still be inflamed. And that lung tissue is still being damaged. You gotta deal with the whole picture.
After 40 years of incalculable human and economic cost, it's hard to imagine how something so deeply rooted in American life can possibly be changed.
Mr. Chairman, we find ourselves as a nation in the midst of a profound, deeply corrosive crisis that we have largely been ignoring at our peril.
But at many levels across the country, there are people trying to change things.
After 30 years, all of my colleagues were afraid for the politics. We have to go a different way.
You have never had so many people on the same side in this issue because we fought a war and we've been unsuccessful.
Congress took action today to fix what many have called a very unfair gap in federal sentencing rules for crack cocaine as opposed to powdered cocaine.
President Obama signed a new law at the White House today, cutting the ratio to 18-1.
We view that as a compromise. We view that as not providing full justice, and we won't rest after that's adopted.
My takeaway from the past 15 years isn't that we need to wait until we get consensus. It's that we need to do what's right. If there are people like this body who are the sentencing experts that are supposed to tell Congress and tell the public what the right thing to do is, I just urge you to do it.
If there's anything ever going to be done about this is going to change. It's going to have to come from the people out there. Going to have to help. We can't do it from in here.
Do you know what it's like to go home at night knowing that you did a personal injustice? I did an injustice to Maurice.
Back in 2008, when I began filming, despite the excitement surrounding the election of Barack Obama, the thoughts Nanny Jeter shared that night would stay with me more than any other.
I've learned so much and I try to tell it to other people, but it's like people rather go down the same road that you went down before they learn. You make mistakes through life. It's like mistakes is always there. But when you somehow blow your kid's life, you always think about it.
But above all, I will never forget who this victory truly belongs to. It belongs to you.
I don't understand the war on drugs. All I know is I miss my son.
What is America to me? The house I live in, the friends that I have found, the folks beyond the railroad, and the people all around, the worker and the farmer, the sailor on the sea, the men who built this country, that's America to me. The house I live in, my neighbors white and black, the people who just came here, often generations back, the town hall and the soapbox.